Welcome back to the Underdog Soccer Podcast. This is Matty Knips. We also got Marcus O'Malley here. We got Justin here too. Justin Moran. Moran. In Louisiana, it would be more of a Moran.
Well, it comes from the Irish O'Morion, but we don't go that far.
I like fair enough. All right, so we got a bunch of stuff going on. USA plays Mexico in their 7th of 14 World Cup qualifiers tomorrow night in Cincinnati, which is the biggest game yet in this round of qualifying, I would say. So we got a couple things to talk about. We're not going to go too deep into the roster. I think it's already kind of been talked about since it was released a week ago. But I had a couple things that I wanted to point out. Let's first talk about Aaron Long. So Aaron Long was not added to the roster, but he was invited to training. He's just coming off an injury. I think he hasn't played since May 16th, an Achilles tendon. So he's fully training with the team. So Justin, what do we think? Why is he there? What is Berhalter's opinion of him? What do you think?
Berhalter obviously rates him based on how much he's called Long up and played him in the past. I think he's probably up there in the top, at least top 5, if not really top 4 of Greg's center backs. So he's bringing him in to train with the team, just to be around them, really just to continue his rehab. He could be rehabbing alone, so why not bring him in and have some time with his friends on the team? And I like the idea. It's actually not a bad idea. This guy's just rehabbing every day, not seeing a lot of people. So he gets to be part of this energy with the camp. I think for a lot of people, it just smacks of Greg's continual favoritism toward MLS players. And I can see both sides of it. I don't know. I'm interested in your guys' takes.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I don't have a major issue with it in general, to help a guy out that's been an important part of your program, competing for a starting spot. But the optics are just off for me, especially with, just being this window. If it were a young player and you're bringing him up, I really liked how we called in a couple of the young guys like Paredes, who were knocking on the door, scratching at the door. This one just seems a little off to me. It's it's a nice gesture, but then, it almost feels a bit of favoritism versus other guys who have been on the edge, the edge of the roster. If we're really trying to make the best use, to me, it's bringing guys along that are young. Or if someone was rehabbing that you were expecting to see in the next window or two, that to me would make sense. I think the optics just feels a little bit bad with the timing. So but again, it's not a major heartburn for me. I'm not exceedingly upset about it. It's just gave me a bad vibe initially.
Yeah, I'm not too upset about it. I mean, I think Long, when he's fully fit, I think he is near that second center back. Behind Brooks, I think. So, it's that battle for who's the second center back. He's in the conversation, basically. So I'm not upset, but it is just kind of weird how I don't know. I can't remember the last time that any men's national team coach, USA at least, has done this for a player. Maybe I'm just missing something, but that's how it showed up to me. But my question is, so he obviously rates him. Let's just talk about Berhalter's rating of him. He obviously rates him in the top 4 or 5 center backs because that he would bring him into camp, let's say, if he was fully fit. So if he brings him into camp, that knocks out who is my question. Does it knock out John Brooks, who's not there? So let's not even consider John Brooks. Does it knock out Walker Zimmerman? He's always rated Long over Zimmerman. Does it knock out Mark McKenzie? Would it knock out one of the guys that are a better passer than a defender like Chris Richards?
I think Mark McKenzie seems like the first name that would go. He's not been playing. It's been almost 3 weeks since he's played in a league match for his club in Belgium. Berhalter seems to have these beliefs about players that don't necessarily change based on whether they're playing or not, or whether they're playing well or not, or poorly. I do think it's possible that Zimmerman has leaped Long in Greg's mind. And I do think Brooks will be back. So I guess Brooks, Zimmerman, Richards, and then the question is Long, or who am I missing? Who would be Brooks, the other? Yeah. Brooks, Zimmerman, Long, Richards.
Robinson.
Oh yeah, Miles Robinson. Yeah. So
I was almost thinking it could bump him and I know that sounds crazy, but I guess Berhalter wouldn't see it that way, but I'm just thinking of if we're just looking for a non like strong passing center back, a distributing center back, like it kind of compares him to Zimmerman and Robinson.
I think Miles might be Greg's number one now. I think he does
Yeah.
put a lot of stake in tournaments, a lot of stake in those finals teams. You're seeing the guys like Areola, even though they didn't perform well, they were part of that Gold Cup winning team. I think they're getting a lot of grace. Mark McKenzie, I think, is getting a lot of grace because of the Nations League final. Even though he made errors, he was a part of that team. And I think Greg puts a lot of value on that locker room, and almost wonder if this might be an experiment, to bring along and to see, does it click with the team? Because he has not been a part of either of those winning teams, which has made up most of the core of this group. It hasn't been club play, to Justin's point. It's been kind of like, it feels like he's leaned on that formula of the Nations League final and the Gold Cup final. It's like, hey, let me keep this group, this core, and very sparingly probe guys like Pepe, who he waited 3 games, to leverage. Like, he's been very sparing to mess with the chemistry of those 2 finals. So that's where I think Long maybe on the outside looking in now, because he wasn't a part of those 2 groups.
Also, Zimmerman's one of his captains. So I think that, in comparing your center backs, that gives Zimmerman a slight edge there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So going on to what I think Justin was saying earlier about Mark McKenzie not playing well, like he hasn't played the last 3 games. So first of all, I was a little bit surprised that he was on this roster, especially when Brooks was dropped. Like, I thought if you would have dropped one of those 2, it would have been McKenzie. And so then that kind of led me to thinking like the comparison of talking about like Musa and Busio. And we all love the MMA midfield, including myself. I want to see that started against Mexico, McKennie, Musa, and Adams. But if you look at recent playing time, Musa's got like 70 minutes in the last 3 games. And Busio is the star of Venezia. So what do we think about that? Would you still stick? Like, is Berhalter going to do that? What do we want to see?
Marcus, you want to go first this time?
Sure. I have never seen the U.S. play better in the central midfield than MMA. Until I see that falter, I would not mess with that chemistry. I think Busio has earned it with his club play. But going in such a critical game, having not seen those 3 play together yet, I would stick with what I know, even though Musa has had limited minutes compared to Busio. I would be very quick and ready to sub him on if we needed it. But I just feel I've never seen the U.S. play as well as I have centrally, and that I think is going to be so critical in this Mexico game. Of all the games that we play, that to me, like, I think we should know what we have going into Mexico, and that's a known quantity for me. I would bet on MMA, until we see them falter.
Yeah, I agree. The issue with Musa's time at Valencia is a good thing to bring up, but it's also not a dramatic change. He's never been a key player for Valencia. He's always been a guy who's coming off the bench or who's playing out wide. He's not the cog in their midfield the way he is for the U.S. midfield. So I don't think it's a concern when you see how consistent he has been in his performance with the U.S. That's not a guy that you take off the field because suddenly things are going even slightly differently with his club. I'm excited about Busio. Like you said, Marcus, he's a great option to bring off the bench. The thought of being in the 55th minute or the 70th minute against Mexico and then saying, hey, we're going to bring this kid on who's really lighting it up right now in Serie A. That's a cool thought. But no, you don't change MMA just for that.
Yeah. So you sub him in around the 65th?
See how the game goes, right?
Like
it doesn't
that.
have to be pre-planned.
Yeah, true. Well, but let's be honest. I kind of think he has a lot of them pre-planned, his subs in the past.
You're making my point for me.
Yeah, you might want to be, just keep an eye on the legs for Musa, just knowing, and or maybe you just let him run, knowing you have Busio coming off the bench. It's like, dude, just go at Mexico, like free for all, give us your best 60, and maybe pre-plan it, giving Musa that reins to just wear them down centrally, because what you have in McKennie and Adams right next to you.
NBA doesn't quite have as good of a ring as MMA, I guess.
I'm in education, man. It flies.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Mexico game more. So that would be our midfield. Do we agree that MMA, we would start with that? So Justin, build us from the back. Who do you have, keeper and defenders, that you would start in that game?
Yeah, I'd go with Turner in the back. I think his shot stopping will be important in this game. And I've heard people positing theories that we basically need to choose tactics and a lineup based on those tactics one way or the other. So we need to play with all of our possession players on the field or with none of them and with the grinded out, physically dominant team. And I think that is a sound strategy when it comes to the 10 field players. But with keeper, I think we can play with the ball with our 10 field players and rely on Turner to be that wall to prevent Mexico from scoring. So I go with Turner in the back. I go with Miles and Richards, my center back pairing, Anthony on the left. I'd start Joe Scally on the right. I'd go with the MMA midfield, and then Aronson way up Pepe up front.
What you think, Marcus?
Yeah, I agree. I lean Stefan just to stretch Mexico a little bit. They are coming with a stronger striker core. So I think if we can stretch them a bit, if Stefan's able to play with the ball, opening up MMA in that midfield, I have a sense this is not going to be a strong defensive game. I think it's going to look more like the Nations League final, just a gut instinct based off of the talent that we're putting on the field. So to me, I think having Stefan there would probably be, I think that's my only difference. I agree. I've wrestled with Scally or Yedlin. Do you want to put pressure on the kid like that? But he's delivered to date. He has not seemed to shy away, and I don't know. I'm just excited about him, and I think it'd be really interesting to see him in a big game like this. I'm probably more open to seeing that risk, although I doubt that we will based off of history. I think it's probably going to be Edlin on the right.
I'd go Stefan. I'd go Stefan for possession factor over better shot stopping ability. That's such a hard decision to make. I mean, I understand that those are each guy's strength over the other, but I think I would edge Stefan for this specific game. My defense would look the same, hoping for Scally, expecting Yedlin, which is fine. Yedlin is our most experienced player. And so I think he's ready for a fight, especially against Mexico.
I want to say this too. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I do think Brooks is our best center back, but I'm actually very excited to see Richards and Robinson if we get to see them. I do think Brooks' biggest weakness is his athleticism. So if Chris Richards can become what we think he can become, and Miles can continue to develop the way that he has, I think we could actually improve, even though currently I think Brooks is the best. I think having two athletic center backs that can make up for missed hits, we've seen that at Brooks. He's had a couple of flawed moments. Most of that has been around his athleticism. He's incredible positionally. He's incredible defensively. His passing, I don't think anyone's there yet. But I am very excited in a big game. Like, I think this could be a huge bonding moment for that two young center backs to be the next generation for, maybe 2026 and beyond. If they could get a big Mexico win, I think this could be a huge opportunity for that duo with Brooks off the field. It'll
show Berhalter a lot too. He won't need to, and who knows, maybe he'll feel a lot more comfortable about his decision to leave Brooks home.
Yeah, I definitely wanted Brooks on this roster, and he should have been, clearly. He should have been both over Zimmerman and McKenzie. But I still would have started Miles and Richards in this game just because of their ability to defend in space. They clean up so many messes in the back, and that gives you a little bit more freedom to go with an option like Scally at fullback even. Because, again, they've played together. They've done well together. Miles is not the distributor Brooks is, but you can rely on Richards for some of that, and you can rely on the fullbacks for some of that as well.
Yeah. And front three, I think you said Weah, Aronson, Pepe.
Yeah, which is probably a confusing order for some people. Pepe up top. I had Aronson on the left and Weah on the right.
I wouldn't test Pulisic out there yet. I would make sure he's fully ready to start and go at least 70 minutes, 80 minutes. I don't want to have to worry about taking him out too early. I'd agree with Weah and Aronson.
Yeah, I suspect Areola starts over Weah. I know that will upset a lot of people. I don't like it, but I love Weah coming off the bench. Like, that's just he was to me the difference maker in the Nations League final. when he came on, it changed everybody. Weston played different, Pulisic played different. He was the difference maker off the bench. So even though I'm not happy about Areola starting over him, I am happy to see him coming in the 65th, 70th minute and just terrorizing that back line, which is already potentially shorthanded because of injuries coming into this game. And what we saw in that Nations League final, where if it's a close game, you know, he could be the difference maker in that, even though I think we're losing that talent by having Areola start.
I think if he gives us MMA without Leggett, I think he has to give us Areola. I think there's a give and take there. Like he's gotta have one of his guys out there, whether it be Areola or Leggett or Roldan or Acosta. And so if he's not getting any of the others, it's got to be Areola. It's a crazy theory, but I'm probably right.
Let's talk about Pulisic too. I think there's been a lot of debate about whether he should start and how much he should play versus Mexico. And I already said it, and I agree with you guys. I would bring Pulisic on as a super sub if needed. And you know, you hope that you get to the 60th minute or whatever, and we're doing great, and we don't even need a super sub to do his job. And then he only comes on maybe for 15 at the end, just to strike some extra terror in the hearts. But and I won't be upset if he starts. To be clear, you know, it's exciting. It's awesome to see him playing against Mexico. He loves to play against them. He loves to win. But I will be really worried because he's been out for 2 months. And since coming back, he's only played 23 minutes total across 2 games for Chelsea. And he's looked good in those 2 games. But Mexico is really good at targeting and attacking and hacking and kicking players.
And hacking.
And CONCACAF refs are not going to help us. You cannot put a player out there who you're worried about and hope that your CONCACAF ref is going to call the game well and dish out yellow cards early and catch the things that happen, because that's not how it works. These things happen and guys sneak in cheap shots and they know, where to kick a guy. And that's not saying that Mexico is these awful, immoral players, but they know how to weaken other teams and how to win games. And we have to be smart about how we use our player, because his club career is more important than the slight upgrade he gives us over Weah or Aronson for a few extra minutes.
And we beat Mexico twice in a final this summer. Christian's penalty and the silence picture has been all over the internet. So as if they needed any extra motivation for a U.S. game, this group is going to be especially motivated. And Pulisic is the poster child, the face of that loss. You know, even the Gold Cup loss, it's more of like a 1-0 defensive battle. There wasn't necessarily like the face of the loss in the way that the Nations League final was just peppered around the newspaper and social media. So he will be especially targeted when he gets on the field, without question in my mind.
He needs those old school shin guards that you that you slip over, that have the little extra ankle protection all the way around it. That'll help him out. Won't slow him down at all.
One other piece talking about with Pulisic too is how the team responds when there's a bad foul or an aggressive tackle. That's something, Greg talks about different phases of the game. And I think this is a phase of the game that gets talked about not nearly enough, which is when there is a bad foul, how players react and the pressure that puts on the official. And I'm not talking about all of the field players swarming around the ref and getting in his face, but I would say coming up to the player who fouled him, getting in his face, put your hands on him, don't cross the line. But every time Pulisic's fouled, I would love to see the team come in like that. I would love to see them count the number of times. The first time it happens that the 5 players around run up and hold up. This is the first time. This is the second time, just to make it super clear what's happening and to make it clear to the Mexico players that they aren't just going to stand by and let this player get hacked.
I didn't think about it till you just said that. Brooks being missing, we're going to be hurt. We're going to be missing that. He was. You
got McKennie there.
You do, but Brooks was right in there. He had several great videos, little clips of him getting into it with several players throughout that Nations League final.
Could you imagine a 73rd minute sub? It's 1-1 and the sub is Christian Pulisic. Could you imagine being in that crowd? A late game sub, he's coming on, our savior is coming to help us. But yeah, it would just be a pretty awesome environment to see him coming in the game that late. But hopefully he's safe and protected and his ankles are okay.
Pulisic and Weah coming in the 70th in a tie game. I would feel real good. Or Busio, maybe being part of that sub, those 3 coming in. I would not feel real good being up second string, third string Mexican
Right.
defender. Seeing those three come on.
And if they've been chasing all game, it'll hurt even more when you see those people coming on, those guys coming on.
Musa, even Areola, and we pick on him. I have major issues with his ability with the ball, but he does run. He does wear down defenders.
Yeah.
He does make them work. I think his work rate does tax a defender. So, like there's that. And Brendan Aronson has an incredible motor. I've no doubt, they're gonna be tired after that game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every time that's pointed out, I feel the need to respond. Tim Weah is just as good at all those things that Areola is, plus the offensive skill set. And I know you guys know, and it's just a message to Greg. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything else about World Cup qualifying game against Mexico? I guess we should talk about the game against Jamaica as well before we move on to the December camp. Before actually, let me just stress how important this game is against Mexico. Like, this is the most difficult game that USA has played yet. So it's the game that they're most likely to lose. A loss would be not unexpected. It's a very possible scenario ending. That would put us 6 points behind Mexico in the table, though. That would probably put us behind Canada as well, who's playing Costa Rica at home in Edmonton. So you assume Canada's gonna win and take second in the table. USA would drop to at least third, and then Panama would potentially also be on 11 points with a win against Honduras, I believe. That's who they play. So a loss to Mexico, which is possible, would be really, really bad for what's coming up next. You're halfway through the qualifying with 7 games to go, and you've now dropped to third place, tied for fourth, and your heaviest games are ahead of you. At Mexico, at Canada.
Yeah, Mexico has one of the easiest overall strength of schedules remaining. I think they're in the top 3 away and at home. We have the second best home after, ahead of us, and the second worst away legs as far as strength of schedule based off the ELO rating. So Mexico, a loss probably puts us at a contention for 1 period. And now we're fighting for only 2 spots, tied with the 4th place team, tomorrow or, Saturday with 6 games left. I think, it's not a great spot. I think we've got to get at least a point out of this.
And although a point's not bad, especially against Mexico, I'll take it. A point also would put us into 3rd place behind Canada.
You're supposed to win your games at home and steal on the road. This would be our 2nd non-win at home. We would have to win that Jamaica game to go away with 6 weeks off, at least. I can't remember how many weeks it is between the next World Cup qualifying, just from the media pressure and the fan pressure, the media hype around the pressure on this team if we don't come away with at least 4 points from this window.
And I think a lot of people will push back and say, well, it's Mexico. You can't expect to beat them. But people need to choose. Is it win at home, draw on the road? Or is it beat the weak teams, draw the strong teams? Because we have lost to Panama. We have drawn to Canada. We drew to El Salvador. So we're not doing a great job. And that draw to Canada was at home. So we need to pick one, if not both, and figure out which games we are actually required to win. Because we can't go draw on the road or lose on the road, draw against good teams at home, and only win against weak teams at home. That's a recipe to not qualify. And I don't think that we're going to miss this next World Cup, but I think that we are way off the trajectory that we should be, given the talent gap between us and the rest of CONCACAF.
Yeah. And one thing to I expressed my concern earlier with losing this game to Mexico and where that would put us. There is going to be a gap between 4th and 5th place, I think. From the top 4 to the bottom 4, the gap is going to continue to just separate. So even if it put them into 3rd, tied for 4th, like that gap is not going to be that serious. And so I don't think they'll ever drop below 4th place.
Yeah, and I
think they'll qualify.
Qualifying's got to be the priority, but if we're not top 2, that will drop us down a tier and make the World Cup shorter. which
Yeah.
I think as we look to 2026, even if people are like, yeah, we're not going to be ready, you know, I know a lot of people are writing off 2022. It's still a learning experience. So if we can get out of the group stage into the round of 16, that's another game. That's another week of these guys playing together against the best teams in the world. We don't get to experience that often in a competitive environment. You know, we don't get to play the European teams very often. It's a big deal, even if you're looking past 2022. I think every game, every minute in a competitive tournament like the World Cup against the top, even if we get crushed, you know, in the first round, getting out of the group stage, just gaining that experience as a collective to, you know, earn the points that are required in a competitive tournament to move to the group stage is important in the learning development. And having missed an entire cycle, you know, of not being in this last World Cup, this one becomes exponentially more important for this group to get those experiences.
Do you think I kind of just, this popped in my head, but do you think the excuse making related to CONCACAF opposing stadiums and fans and venues, do you think that theory would go away with, God, I don't want to say like getting away from the MLS players, but these older guys that have been around the team since the previous kind of qualifying time windows, years, what am I looking for? What's the word? Anyway, do you think that theory would go away if we graduated the Legettes, the Areolas, the Roldans, the guys that have been around a while, and we just freshly went with the younger guys who that might not seem to be a thing for them? They've played the toughest schedules already, and they're 18, 19, 20 years old.
Good, Justin.
They're playing against all the biggest teams in Europe.
Take that one, Marcus.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think they have to just earn it. I think they have to win on the road in CONCACAF to get it. You know, I think you know, the media is the media. A lot of these guys played in MLS. You know, that speak into this, that follow MLS. That's where they make their money. So winning in Europe, I don't think is as impressive to that group. I think a lot of the fan base are getting more educated or watching these guys play overseas. I think a lot of us have higher expectations, but until they get it done, I don't think that story will change. And it's not changing right now, right? Like to Justin's point, we're not even winning at home with that level of talent. So, you know, we might suspect it's the coach and make our own case about, you know, whether the talent is better than that. But the media is not going to make that case. They're going to say it's because it's youth, it's an experience, it's this, it's that. And until they actually get it done in CONCACAF and erase that story, you know, the way that other countries are forced to do, I think that stigma is going to be here.
I guess I'm just looking for any reason to drop the stigma and to get over the excuses and stuff. I don't know.
And going back to Marcus's point about the 2022 World Cup, I think it is a mistake for anyone to look past it. And I understand the idea that we're hosting in 26. And so 22 is like this dress rehearsal for us where we have the young players. They're hopefully most of them will be around and will be in even stronger club positions 4 years from now, although we don't know that. And so we want to give it a go so that in 26, we really have an idea what it looks like. But I think you have to be really careful with that mindset, because if you're thinking, okay, this is kind of the practice run, and then 26, now it's for real, you actually don't have an experience of taking it for real, of really going into the World Cup to see how far you can go. So if we have any hope of trying to get to, you know, the quarters, the semis in 26, then we have to be looking at 2022 like life and death and have that scenario, because it's a totally different mindset.
Yeah, you look at 2009 when we beat Spain in the Confederations Cup, we were leading Brazil in the final. 2010, we draw England. You know, those were things that set up that group for 2014. You know, there was belief in Donovan, in Dempsey. That was what got Jurgen interested and excited about the opportunity with the U.S. You know, as we think about a coach even for 26, like we want them to be excited to get a big name. So the noise that they make at 2022 could definitely play a part in that. Interest and excitement and belief, both as a nation and fan base, but also the noise in the soccer sphere. So getting a big win against a you know, strong European side, you know, beating Croatia or something if they're in our group or something like that, you know, having a marquee victory could play a huge part in the team's belief, as well as, you know, potential for coaches and dual nationals as well.
Let's talk about December. So USA plays Bosnia on December 18th. The camp starts a week or so before it. It's going to be mostly a domestic-based camp with MLS players, maybe a couple of USL players, let's hope. So first question, do you think that Berhalter is going to bring all or most of his World Cup qualifying guys from the MLS? So that's Zimmerman and Robinson, Pepe, Acosta, Roldan, all those guys. What do you think he does with those?
It seems like a safe bet. He tends to bring those guys in no matter what. Even if he does bring in some young faces to the camp, I think that he wants as much stability and continuity in the team as possible. And as scary as this might sound to some fans, he wants those players to show the young players what the national team is about, which is not the dream for me. I'm not looking for Paul Arriola to be showing a young winger like Paxton Pomykal or Cade Cowell or Dante Sealy what it's about, when those players are actually better on the ball than Arriola is. And those are two different things as far as the international experience and what that's like. But yeah, I do think he includes them.
Yeah. And then I think there's 6 guys that are out of the playoffs right now, and there'll be more by then, obviously, as the playoffs begin in Major League Soccer. So that will be almost 2 months for 2/3 of this MLS group to not have played any sort of competitive soccer. I think they have to come into camp if he's going to use them in the January window.
Yeah, that's why these windows exist, right? So there's the December camp, and there's also going to be an MLS camp in January leading up to the actual World Cup qualifying camp. I think the games are end of January, beginning February for the next window. So if he's going to be able to lean on the guys that he wants in MLS, these camps are there to give them some modicum of form going into those windows.
Which is what it was originally created for. I think it was Bruce Arena that created the January camp, and that was the initial intention. Was MLS was out for several months, and it was to get that group of MLS players, because that was predominantly most of the team at that time. We only had a couple guys in Europe back then. That was the original reason for a January camp, so it makes sense that we would leverage it as best we can.
So that's 10 to 12 spots of the roster that he's going to use for those guys. So now you look after that and you're like, okay, we got a U20 camp going on right now. That's mostly MLS kids as well, guys as well. But there leaves this like gap between the U20 guys and so I was just noticing take center back, for example, our best MLS options are Pineda, Pines, and Kessler, who are 23 and 24 years old. And it leaves this gap of 2000s and 2001 guys because they have already kind of moved on from MLS. So is he going to go with some U20 guys and bring in Justin Che and I forget who the other guys were on there, Casey Walls and some other younger guys, or is he going to bring in the kind of middle of the road guys like Pines, Pineda, Kessler?
I think you can do a mix
with that
of both.
specific possession or any position.
Yeah, I think you can do a mix of both. You look at the real blue chip U20 prospects and maybe bring in a handful of them. And maybe there's a handful of guys who are in that in-between area that you don't mind seeing because they've been performing well enough in the league. Center back is a little unique. It's kind of like goalkeeper in that 23, 24 is still relatively young. Now you're probably not going to end up as a Bayern first team player if you're playing for the Revs at age 24, right? But that doesn't mean that you might not contribute to the national team either. So I think you can take from each group. You can take some of the top players. You can take some of these guys who are kind of tweeners, and then from the youngest group, the very best, the guys who are already contributing at a pretty high level.
I'd agree with that. And then there's a couple guys over in Europe. I think we mentioned them, Brian Ko and some others that I think you could leak in if they're kind of buried a little bit in some of the lower leagues. Uli Yanez has been hot lately. I think there's a couple names that you could trickle in to the camp that he's done historically. Was that 2019 when Uli scored that penalty, and it kind of sparked a lot. We've seen Bobby Wood, under Jurgen get called in. He was not playing well in the second Bundesliga, and then all of a sudden, scores a goal against Holland, and I think it was Germany that summer, and then all of a sudden, springboards his career. So I wonder if there's a couple of guys over in Europe that would be worth pulling in that may be buried right now, on a U19 team or loaned out to a partner that could be pulled in as well.
Yeah, I actually threw together a depth chart if you guys want to run through it, but if we don't have time, or you want to just talk about it in generalities, that's okay as well.
Marcus has got to dip out in a little bit. I guess I should probably ask this question to you. Does he as in Berhalter call in Gomez, Jogo?
I doubt it. I mean, maybe for December camp, he'll be, signed and transferred, whatever the window opens January 2nd.
Right.
So he'll probably want to get with the first team over in Spain. It's a huge opportunity for him. They're leading La Liga right now. So maybe in December. Personally, I almost don't want him to, in a way. Like I would rather this first call up be with Pulisic, Reyna, like Adams. Like I don't want his first opportunity to be like second
Right.
fiddle to a bunch of MLS guys, and that be his experience that he's comparing to playing against, Raul Jimenez and Chucky Lozano and some
Right.
of those guys. I would not want that to be like the scale that he's working against when he's measuring, having played with the U.S. twice. I get it, get him in a camp, get personally familiar with him. So maybe that happens in December based off of Blue City's playoff, which I'm hoping we plow through Tampa and are in the finals again.
They should have Aaron Longed him and just invited him to camp late, and even though he's not coming back from injury, but
yeah, it would have been cool if he came with Paredes, who he's good friends with, when those guys came down to Texas in the first window. I think that would be a good gesture to bring 2-3 guys in. I feel like he should do that every window. I would. Some of those sort of B-lister guys that you're not quite ready to, but get them around the camp, get them around Pulisic, Adams. They're in the States. It's a huge opportunity to kind of market the team, to some young guys and get a feel for them.
Yeah, somebody made a good point to me on Twitter that there's only about 2.5 hours between Louisville and Kentucky. So Joe goes in Louisville and Cincinnati. The team's in Cincy.
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't be that big of a thing to bring him in for a day or two, even though they are in their playoff run. And I understand not having him in this window. And I do see the potential negatives of having him next window. That being said, I'd still be ecstatic to see him just because it would be an experience for him in the U.S. full camp, even though it's not full camp with Pulisic, Dest, Reyna, Kenny, all those guys, which is what you want to see. And that's what should have happened earlier this year. But who knows, maybe it's actually better for him to have somewhat of an off season since he's going to be plunged right back in with Sociedad B in January.
Has any USL player been called in under Berhalter?
No, I don't think so.
I wonder if there's any
Jonathan Lewis. Jonathan Lewis was
former USL, yeah.
A
lot of former USL, but as in a current USL player, either on loan or otherwise, I can't think of a player. I wonder if there's any sort of politics at play. Maybe not, but I just wonder, if that could play a part. It's not a partner. Obviously, some historically had their finger and that relationship has severed. But I'd be curious if there's any bad blood with him having left FC Dallas.
True. Yeah, it was a pretty big story when Klinsmann brought Miguel Ibarra into camp when he was playing with Minnesota back in their USL days.
Yeah,
I think it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
Agreed.
So Justin, you said you just pulled up a list real quick of.
Yeah, and I have a bunch of
certain
MLSers
position?
in my list, but I can also just chat through the non-MLS guys just to show how many there are who potentially could join.
Right.
But if you want, I can go super speed and just hit some of the MLS names on the way as well.
Hit some highlights of the guys not in MLS that people maybe wouldn't have
in
mind right now.
So I'll start from the back again. I think Jonathan Tompkinson is a defender who's with Norwich City's B team. He's their captain for the U23s. He's been playing really well. He scored goals for them. I'd love to see him in. And we're a little bit short of MLS center backs, as you guys pointed out. We do have Miles, Zimmerman, Kessler, and potentially Che, but I don't see the harm in bringing a guy like that who he's there with the reserves. So Norwich would miss him for a week or two, but he's also a guy that'd be interesting to take a look at. Moving forward, Johnny Cardoso, his last club game is December 5th, which is the first day of camp. So it doesn't seem unrealistic at all that he could be brought in. He provides an alternative to Acosta.
Do they have playoffs?
I don't know.
I think they have a cup, but I think it may start later. I don't know if it starts immediately after this.
Okay. Yeah, because I had him written down as well. Anyway.
Yeah. Moving on in central midfield, Alan Senora's last club game is December 12th, which is smack dab in the middle of camp. A little trickier to bring him in, but you could do it. He'd have 2, 3, 4 days in camp prior to the game. And he's certainly a guy who's worth taking a look at. He's been doing very well with Independiente in Argentina. I'm failing to remember if it was team of the week or team of the month. Both are impressive if you're playing in the Argentine top tier.
I think it was month. He's at 8, but he can play the 6 as well, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm. And from what I've seen of him, I don't know that I'd want him at the 6 because he's such a technical player and not maybe as much of a defender. But I definitely would love to see him in the midfield just as a depth option, right? We're not saying start him over Musa or something, but to see what he could bring as a squad player. A couple other midfielders are Taylor Booth, who is with Bayern's reserves. He did really well on loan in Austria in the spring and actually looked good with Bayern's first team this summer as well. He's starting as the right back for Bayern's reserves right now, which is a little odd, but I think he's doing a little bit of the Tyler Adams, Nick Lima right back and midfield role that Greg was doing on early 2019. But Booth is just a really technical player and just plays the game really well. I'd love to see him, see what he's got. I don't think Bayern too would mind seeing him with a full national team. Christian Caffey, his last club game is December 11th. So again, that's a week before the US game. It's a little tight, but that's a cup match. So they might even be able to spare him. He's not a core player at Brøndby, so maybe they'd let him go. I think he could provide options for us both at the 6 and the 8 as a reserve. And there are a few more guys up on the front line. You mentioned Yanez. Emmanuel Savi's last game is in the cup on December 12th as well. And then there's a couple of speculative forwards like Fuller and Balogun with Arsenal's reserves and Malik Tillman, who's kind of on the edge of Bayern's first team, and Sebastian Soto toiling away with Porto's reserves in the second tier.
I think we also need to make sure that, or Berhalter needs to make sure that he's looking at the 6 specifically in this camp. You know, after Adams and Acosta, it's who's next. I'm assuming that he thinks it's Uli, which is kind of scary to think about because I don't think he's the guy. But yeah, I wrote down a handful of other guys: Sands, Parks, Pereira, Flock. And you mentioned all the other ones, Johnny, Senora.
Tanner Tessman as well. He's been getting more minutes in Serie A.
Yeah, would they release him though in December?
Not for December. I think he should have been in the full roster, maybe along with Acosta, but maybe we'll see him in the January or the February qualifying window.
Right, but I think Berhalter needs to prioritize that. That needs to be one of his goals, where he finds depth at the 6, and he hasn't really. I don't know. He hasn't tinkered much with that position in the past 3 windows, or you can even, I guess, go back to over the summer.
He hasn't tinkered with it much in 3 years.
Yeah.
And we're going to have, we're going to have 2 critical windows in the last 2 windows, with potentially half of the squad, if he takes the same group, having not played for 8, 10, 12 weeks in competitive matches. They'll be at camps. But they're not even going to be in training with their club side, through the holidays. Like that cannot be overstated. That's
which window do you mean? The January one?
Yeah, January and March.
There are players, 6, 7 players that are done right now, and will not have played a competitive match until that one. They're going to play a friendly and have a couple camps and get a workout, but haven't played competitive minutes. And there are 10 MLS players on this roster. So the other 4 or 5, we'll see how far they go in the playoffs, but there will be at least a month of not having played competitive matches in a critical window. That's a little nerve wracking when you think about not knowing about who Tessman is, and not having tested or felt out some depth with some players that will be fresh and playing in a competitive match around that time of year.
Quickly moving on to goalkeeper. We hadn't talked about that. Who do you call in for that December camp? And do you call in Gaga Slonina from Chicago, the 17-year-old kid?
You bring Turner. I think at least one of the MLS vets in Hamid, Fry, Melia. Johnson. I'd be fine with seeing Slonina. I don't know why I don't rate Johnson as highly as the others. Is it just because he's in camp all the time? But it's fine.
Right.
I don't have a strong opinion on Slonina either way. He looked pretty good with the U20s last night versus Brazil, but I also don't think he's at the level where he's going to be truly competing for a spot. So it's really a question of, do we think he's about to dip and go to Poland if he's left off a December roster, but it doesn't hurt to have him either. So I truly am 50-50. You could bring 4 keepers,
I guess I'm just looking at it as we need to bring at least one younger guy in, even though Horvath, Stefan, and Turner are all 26, 27. They would all be available for even 2026. But yeah, I guess I just want to bring in one younger guy. 17 doesn't have to be as young, but there's no one in the 20 to 21 to 22 years old range.
Do you consider someone from Europe?
Yeah, I was going to say Chituro Dunze might be the other shout. And I'm not saying he's way above Slonina right now, but I think those two guys are probably the two young guys if you're thinking about it.
I was going to say, you know, someone that's at least playing in youth is going to be better than an MLS player that's been off for 2 months as your third stringer. You know, you may want to consider, you know, especially we'll see what Stefan's doing, but we may have 3 keepers that had not played a competitive match on the roster, you know, coming into January in a month for all we know, you know, unless we bring somebody that's at least playing in youth or somewhere, even, you know, at least Stefan and Horvath will be training with their clubs, you know, in a bit more of a competitive environment.
CJ was brought into a camp a year or two ago, Dos Santos.
That was a January camp. Yep.
Yeah, last December.
Or yeah.
Oh, right. That's when it was. Because other than that, the other younger MLS guys, CJ Marcinkowski, Tyler Miller,
Klinsmann.
Tomas Romero with LAFC as well.
Yeah. So I don't know. Any other guys that we need to talk about that could potentially be on that roster? What forwards would you bring in? DK?
Pepe and DK are the obvious ones. I think maybe Ferreira too, but I'd love to see him in that underneath role. I think it would be awesome to see the team play with a 10, maybe like a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3 that has a real 10. Because we have Georgi Mihailovic, we have Jesus Ferreira, Caden Clark. Those 3 guys fit that role pretty well. And I think that Greg needs to explore that option with the full team. It fits Reyna well as well. It fits Ledesma when he's back hurt. We have guys who fit that 10 role and they don't fit as well necessarily as an 8 or a wing. So love to see those guys as the 10, and Pepe and DK are the obvious ones up top.
I'd pull in CJ Sapong. He's been on fire. It'd just be fun. It'd be good to give him a little shout. You know, I don't think there's any really young strikers. What's the kid on Minnesota?
Brian White.
Yeah, Brian White maybe. I just don't think we have a ton of young strikers that I can think of.
One other name I missed going through my Euro rundown is Brian Reynolds at Roma. He seems to be completely frozen out. And
that's a good one.
And we have a few different MLS options on the right with Kyle Duncan, who appears to be moving to Oostende and the Belgian league. And Aaron Herrera had a good year as well. Yeah, and Justin Che can play on the right. He's been doing that for Dallas. But I do think Reynolds is a better player than any of them, despite his poor club situation. So if Roma would let him come, I think that would be a fun time, and just good for him to get out of Roma and get a breath of fresh air. I think we've talked about that before.
Che played on the right the other night, right?
He did.
U20s.
He did, and then they moved to a back 3, and he was the right center back in the back 3.
And on the left, Gomez. I put Dewan Jones.
I had Dewan as well, and Tolkien.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been playing well.
All right.
We won't have George.
Paredes.
We won't have
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Paredes is hurt, and we won't have George Bello because he'll be with the Champions League team by then, if Twitter is to be believed.
All right. Anything else?
It's fun, guys.
All right. Thanks a lot. Good times. Go USA.